Hey there, I'd like to share my Repertoire CD collection. I think I got around 170. At one point in time, I had closer to 200, but a lot of that stuff that I parted with tended to be brick-walled. Repertoire, by the late 1990s, they began mastering things a little bit too loud, louder than what I enjoyed. And I did part with a lot of that stuff. I began collecting from the Repertoire label late 1980s. And at that point in time, there was a handful of labels out of Germany and the UK, the Netherlands, that reissued a lot of classic 1970s psychedelic, progressive, experimental stuff, lesser known bands, I guess you could say. Living in North America and Canada was really hard to get that stuff at the time, and you were paying $25 for a CD import, upwards of $30 for a lot of this stuff. But I loved it. And I had a store. There was a chain called A&B Sound, and they were predominantly Western Canada. I think they were out of BC, Vancouver. But they slowly spread across Western Canada, as far east as Winnipeg. I think that chain went under maybe 25 years ago, 20 years ago. I could be wrong. But anyways, when the owner passed on, it was one of the sad stories where the kids inherit the business and drive it into the ground or just sell it, or bankruptcy, something like that. But anyway, when you would walk into this store in Calgary, it was the old Bank of Montreal building, which was very palatial design with brass railings and marble columns, and it was wall-to-wall CDs. And they had a lot of this stuff in their inventory at that time. Some things you had to special order, but for the most part, I pulled most of this stuff off the floor that they had regular stock. So I'll go through a few things. There's nothing really chronological or alphabetical. It's just sort of piled up in front of me here. And I did go through my shelves. I might have missed a few things, but of course the telltale kind of red tab spine. Some of them don't have that. But I'll start with Hardin and York. And a lot of this stuff, this would probably be in 1994, I'm guessing. Can't really see that. Yeah, it is 94. So the mastering at that point in time was still decent. There was a good dynamic range on this stuff. It wasn't brick-walled at that time. Here's another album by them. Next we have Dando Shaft. It's going to take a while to go through these. But by the late 1990s, they began brick-walling and getting loud. I like to put a CD in and not have to adjust my volume every time. And I know the heavy metal bands, a lot of the stuff by groups like Accept and Annihilator and Riot, hard rock metal, they tended to remaster a lot of those 2000 reissue CDs very loud. I'm not a fan of that. I think people that may have had entry-level cheaper systems or playing music in their car or a boombox, that might have been to their advantage to have a louder CD. But for those of us with a good setup, sitting at home, playing their music at home through the stereo with a decent DAC, you'd want things to be a better dynamic range, not brick-walled, not excessively loud or over-compressed or filtered, blah, blah, blah. So next up, we got Zoot Money, big roll band. This band actually featured Andy Summers. I have another one in here too somewhere. I thought they were kind of in order, but I guess not. Yeah, this featured Andy Summers. This would have been one of the early 90s CDs, and this is a bit loud. It's not that bad. So Vanilla Fudge, they released a couple things on Repertoire. These would have been probably early 90s. These sound great. And keep in mind, along with Green Tree, I think they were affiliated with Repertoire. Some of their CDs, they had the artist's permission, some they didn't. Really early with Repertoire, I have a few instances where they sourced vinyl. But for the most part, it was production master tapes used. And even if they did source vinyl, it was a clean copy, and I could compare a 1989 Repertoire CD, for instance, Mahogany Rush, I forget the name of the album, Strange Universe. I bought a reissue of that came out in the early 2000s, and it sounded horrible. And they probably used a production master tape, but it was just too loud. And my Repertoire CD, despite being sourced from vinyl, sounded better. Just because it had a nicer dynamic range, more organic sounding. Tigers of Pantang, this is a nice sounding disc. That would be from 1989, a very early one, Repertoire. And this is a UFO compilation compiling music from their early years, the Decca years, from the first 3 albums, including that Live in Japan album. Anyways, that's rather subjective, but for myself, I prefer a lot of earlier mastered CDs. Of course, there's some exceptions. Here's one. Okay, so Skid Row. This is a 2002, I believe, remastered CD Repertoire. It sounds terrible. It's so brick-walled and so... and I have a Japanese early 90s CD issue that just floors this. So by this point in time, Repertoire, I don't know what they did. They had some really shitty mastering engineers, and that was just the industry standard to make things louder. The drummer from the German band Grobschnitt comes to mind. He was also one of the mastering engineers for Repertoire during the late 90s, early 2000s, and he tended to master things quite loud. Here is the British band Nirvana, late 60s, early 70s band. I wonder how long this video is going to be. There's the Mahogany Rush I'm talking about. That's a really nice sounding CD. I think it was 1989. And a lot of the Repertoire discs came with these little miniature catalogs. I should have pulled those out because I still have a bunch. I probably have a dozen or more. And every couple of years they would change the catalog. Of course, as their Repertoire, their back catalog grew, they would have to increase the size of the little catalogs. I'll keep that to the side. This is the Canadian band Lighthouse. They're from Toronto, and they actually featured saxophonist Howard Shore, who would later go on to be the musical director for Saturday Night Live. Also, he did soundtracks. So he scored films for Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings trilogies, The Hobbit. That's Howard Shore. So that's his band, Lighthouse. The cover art there is by Roger Dean, I guess best known for Yes and Uriah Heep. In Canada, it was alternate cover art, but that would have been the British Vertigo Swirl, that one. Iron Butterfly. This happens to be my favorite Iron Butterfly album, Metamorphosis, kind of a precursor to Captain Beyond, just because it features Lee Dorman and Larry Reinhardt. That's a good album. And here's another example of a brick-walled CD, and I have another version of this. Eric Burdon and the Animals, The Twain Shall Meet. Kind of loud, not great. It sounds okay, but not great. Amboy Dukes with Ted, these sound great. And I was a smoker for a few years. I quit smoking in the year 2000, so a lot of the discs I had, the white back trays. And Repertoire were notorious for the white back tray. Most of their releases had that, especially early on. And they're kind of yellow tinged from my smoking days and all my friends that would smoke. There's another one. And these sound wonderful, these ones. These Amboy Dukes albums. This is a video. I don't know where I acquired this, but this is a Repertoire, I think it's a DVD combo CD. I don't think I've really played it. Not in a long time, anyway. Black Oak, Arkansas. Only one album on Repertoire, and that's their debut. And it's produced by Lee Dorman. I just mentioned him with Iron Butterfly, the bass player. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. But that's a really good debut by Black Oak, Arkansas. This is another example of a loud CD, a Repertoire CD. And I should mention that Repertoire were bootlegged heavily. So if you got a CD from, let's say, 1992 like this, Geordie, odds are pretty good that the Russians came along 20 years later and bootlegged it. They make it look the same catalog number. And the only thing that could really differentiate might be some of the Matrix run-out data. But none of mine are bootlegs. I bought all these brand new, and I've checked the Matrix, and everything is legit. I did pick up a couple of bootlegs, but I got rid of them. And this band featured Brian Johnson pre-AC/DC. Next up, we got Daddy Longlegs. Kind of a folk progressive-y kind of rock band from England. More early 90s CDs. I think it would have been released 1971 on part of the Vertigo Swirl series at that time. That's a good album. Curly Curve, they're a German krautrock kind of. They merged blues rock and progressive rock. And that was originally on the Brain label. These were still sounding good. These would have been mid to late 90s when they began reissuing the Brain stuff with the green label. They sounded good. They had a good dynamic range, not overly compressed. They sounded good. Now, Curved Air, that's Daryl Away. Stuart Copeland, the drummer that would later play with the Police, was with this band for a while, as was Eddie Jobson. He replaced Daryl Away. So there's Stuart Copeland. If you look closely, you can spot Stu. More Curved Air. Next up is Cressida, British keyboard progressive rock band. This would have been another probably 1992 or something, or 91. What does that say? 92. Yeah, Keyboard Prog. I got both of their albums here, and they were also originally released on the Vertigo Swirl. Procol Harum, Broken Barricades, which happens to be my favorite album by them, but it's a digipack kind of thing. And they even did the die-cut cover to kind of imitate that, but it's another brick-walled example, kind of loud. I have a couple of versions, earlier versions on CD, including, I think it's a 1986-87 Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab that sounds great. So this I just keep. But anyway, another Procol Harum brick wall job. Now we're getting into the German band Jane, and hopefully I have all of them together. The only album not released on Repertoire by Jane, I believe, was the debut called Together, which I have. So I do have complete discographies by all these bands. Not everything. Let's say by Wishbone Ash, I have one or two. Nothing else was released by Wishbone Ash on this label other than, maybe it was just this one. So here we go with Jane. I might have to skip the opening of each case. I kind of like to do that. And these were still good sounding. When there is something brick-walled or something that I don't care for, I'll point that out. Yeah, I never realized how many I had. And I'm not sure how many CDs are in the Repertoire catalog. Probably a few hundred. There's some things that don't really interest me, or some things that I have on CD other labels have issued. So far we're at 13 minutes. This might be a 1-hour video by the time I'm done. I'll see if anybody can guess the music playing in the background. More Jane. I happen to love this band, Jane. German band. So this is the second album, and the debut that I mentioned was not released on this label. And most or all of this stuff I have original pressings on vinyl LP. This was a really cool band. They were an offshoot. I guess the precursor to this would have been Churchills. They were an Israeli psychedelic band from the 60s. Jericho, aka Jericho Jones, were kind of the early 70s successor to that band. Very good band. These would be more early 90s kind of fantastic sounding. Oh, we're working our way into Frumpy. Frumpy were a German band. The vocalist was Inga Rumpf. And after Frumpy split up, she formed the band Atlantis, and they released a few albums. This is Frumpy 2, and I have the original LP with the blue spattered wax from 1972. And that's the debut, and I have the debut of this on Philips. Really, that's my favorite album, I think, by Frumpy right here. Now we're getting into Budgie. Now, as I'd mentioned, I should be showing the spine. They always had that tab. Not always, but typically. Some of them don't, like this, and it's not a bootleg, but I think it's the earliest run. Around 1989, some of the CDs did not have that tab, and this is a really early one. So what year is on that? 89? Yeah. And there was no booklet, just a single slip piece of paper. More Budgie. That's my favorite Budgie album right there. And I have the original LP on the black MCA label, the solid black label with silver text. That's a great album. Roger Dean cover art. And this is their second album, also Roger Dean. This is a picture disc version. I think it was also released without a picture disc the same year. And that's the debut, Budgie. I'm gonna make a mess here. All right, Black Widow. British hard rock progressive band. Is this on Repertoire? Yeah, it is, because I have a couple of their other albums not on Repertoire. Pete Brown, Battered Ornaments. And again, I have all these on original LP. This is Battered Ornaments' debut mantelpiece. I could go into a lot of detail about the recording and how Chris Spedding was, rubbed out and edited out, and guitar parts left in, but vocals. Anyways, that's my favorite Battered Ornaments album. This is Pete Brown's Poblocto. Pete Brown co-wrote a lot of the stuff with Cream, with Jack Bruce. So if you notice, a lot of Cream's albums will have Pete Brown. That's his band. And Jim Mullen played guitar here. And he also played, I think, with Brian Auger. Yeah, he was with Brian Auger Express. Very good album. This has got some awesome keyboard and guitar interplay. My favorite Poblocto. Here's the other Zoot Money. And there's Andy Summer of the Police right there, the guitarist. So after Zoot Money, this would probably be 1965, this album, 66. After that, he joined Eric Burdon and the Animals. He bounced back and forth from the US to the UK before meeting up with the other members of the Police. Fuzzy Duck, another great keyboard guitar band. I have the original LP, which is quite rare, and a couple of reissues. Very good band. I also have a esoteric version. Neither are great. I just don't think the recording was that great. This sounds better than the esoteric, in my opinion. The esoteric, as with most of their CDs, unless you have something to compare to, I find esoteric to be a little compressed, not as open a soundstage, kind of just not a pleasurable listening experience, especially if you have something better to compare to. Day of Phoenix, they were a Danish progressive band, kind of a mix between maybe the Grateful Dead and I'm not sure, but very, very cool Danish band. And we're still in the early 90s stuff. Frigid Pink, they're a Michigan band. That's their third album. I only have the first 3 on CD. I have, I think, the first 4 or 5 albums on vinyl. This is their second album, Defrosted. And these 2 that I just showed you were sourced from production master tapes. This one, however, this is the first Repertoire edition, and this was sourced from vinyl, but it sounds great. They did issue it again, I think, during the mid to late 90s, and that was sourced from a master tape, but I prefer that sound on there. Okay, more German stuff. Lava. I think they were from East Germany, maybe Berlin. East Berlin at that time, another Brain. Definitely an East German band. Gravy Train were from the UK. Norman Barrett was their guitarist, lead vocalist. To my knowledge, they only released the first two. This is their second album on Repertoire. I have the others on Dawn and I think Sequel. This is the debut. And I just realized I forgot to pull a couple things out. Gracious were a British band. I have both albums, but just the one on Repertoire. You can see how yellow that is. So this is the early 90s CD. I also picked up a Repertoire reissue, which is in my shelf. I should have brought it out. It has like the Digipack gatefold replica pebbled cover, but it's terrible. The sonics, too loud, just like not an enjoyable listen. This one's much smoother, organic, warmer sounding. So I keep that. Greatest Show on Earth, more kind of late 60s, early 70s British progressive horn rock. This featured Norman and Garth Watt Roy. Norman was the bass player here, and he went on to play with Glencoe, and then Ian Drury and the Blockheads. So this is him and his brother had this band. And that's Hypnosis cover art on that one. I wonder if I can show you. Might be difficult to remove, but let's see. Yeah, pretty cool artwork. Hypnosis, and then the inside gatefold, and I also have the original LP. I love that shot. Anyway, I shouldn't be trying to do this with one hand. I might wind up damaging something. So now we're getting into the German band Grobschnitt, and I mentioned them earlier because of the drummer Erich. I forget his real name, but he remastered some of this stuff. This one, I don't know if he did. It sounds pretty good. This one, I think that's the English version because I think it's both English and French. Or English and German, I mean. This one sounds okay. He did the remastering. It's not that bad. That's my favorite Grobschnitt album, this one. Or maybe that is. But I only have those three on CD. I have the other albums released by different labels, and I have the original LPs as well. Grapefruit, oh, I missed one. Grapefruit were a British pop psych band. They released 2 albums that I know of, and I failed to pull the other one out. Oh, well, I knew I would miss something. Gun, this is their second album. Final, they only released 2. Adrian and Paul Gervitz on guitar and bass. On these albums, they were credited as Adrian and Paul Curtis. I guess that was a record company thing. God forbid they put a Jewish name. This is Roger Dean. I think that's his first album cover endeavor, I think. 1968, that came out. And this was also released without the picture disc format. This would have been 1990-ish, I got this. And that band would eventually morph into 3-Man Army with Adrian and Paul. And eventually they both joined Ginger Baker and Baker Gervitz's Army. Guru. I only have a couple things on Repertoire. And their other albums, I have their entire discography pretty much on CD and vinyl. But only a couple things on this label. This one still featured the guitarist Axe Genrich, probably pronounced Genrich. Hapash and the Color Code. I like this because it has this red jewel case. I don't know if you can make that out. This was actually Spooky Tooth. Luther Grosvenor and the boys, and Greg Ridley. And I think the guys, I forget the guys that did this, that were Hapash and the Color Code. They were like fashion designers or editors of a magazine, I just forget. But anyway, it's really psychedelic. That's a good album. But they weren't credited Spooky Tooth's members at the time. Hawkwind, to my knowledge, they only released 1 on Repertoire. And that would be this guy during the early 90s. That's the debut. Indian Summer, another one-off. They only released the 1 album on Neon, RCA Neon. And I have original UK and US pressing on vinyl. Really cool keyboard-driven keyboard guitar interplay. Nice stuff. Early 90s CD Repertoire. Oh, we got a few budgie strays that were somehow in this pile. Another one.
And another one. This is actually a really good album. I didn't like it back in the day. I think it came out around 1978. But it was recorded in Canada. This one. And I saw a Budgie in a bar in Toronto around that time. Next pile. Oh, where are we here now? The Move. So this would be Roy Wood and the gang. And Jeff Lynne. So I have a couple versions of this one. Where is it? Yeah. So looking on, Repertoire. I forget which one came out first. I think this one. Alternate cover art. I think this one came out first on Repertoire. And Shazam, which is my favorite. It has Cherry Blossom Clinic. And I have Mayblitz. So Mayblitz were a British psychedelic hard rock trio. And two of the members were Canadian. Reed Hudson and Black, I forget his first name. Guitar player and bass player were both from Canada. And the drummer was Terry Poole, I think. He was British. I could be wrong on that. It's been a while since. That's their second album, 2nd of May. Really good. Many are unaware that there was 2 Canadians in that band. This is their debut. And I have the original Vertigo Swirl LPs, but also the US and Canadian Paramount pressings. Kin Ping Mei, another German band. This, I believe, was the only thing they released on Repertoire. That's their debut. I have the Polydor of that on vinyl. I also have these Killing Floor albums. This is the second Killing Floor. More hard rock kind of progressiveness here. Rod, what was the keyboard player's name? Rod Death, Irish guy. I think he played with Rory Gallagher later. I could be wrong. This is the debut. Yeah, I'm getting older, so my facts might be a little bit askewed. Juicy Lucy. I think this is their final album. Good album, good blues rock. They featured the guitar player that would later play with Whitesnake. You can see the credits there. Mick Moody. And that's not Paul Williams from Planet of the Apes. And that's not Glenn Campbell, the American guitarist singer. Different guy. This has a really nice fold-out cover. It kind of mimics the original LP. In North America, it was released on Atco, and it was just a standard cover, but in the UK. So Novalis is another really cool German band. Kind of a progressive. I wouldn't really call them krautrock, but they were a progressive band. Maybe their first 2 albums could be considered krautrock, maybe, but we'll leave that to people to squabble over. Now, this is their debut album and the only one with English lyrics. I don't think they recorded anything else in English. They tried to do this in English to tap into the British market or the North American, but their German fans didn't care for that, I guess. Earth and Fire were a Dutch band. This is their debut. It was released with alternate cover art in North America, I think. This would be the German or Dutch cover art. That's a really good album, that. Electric Sandwich, more German psychedelic progressive stuff. Probably 1996, the CD. When you see the Brain label, they're usually 96, 97, 98. And they still sounded good. Livin' Blues, Dutch blues band. I have a couple things, but they're out of order here. Dutch blues band. And actually, I got to look at the credits here. One of the guys in the band went on to produce Golden Earring. I just forget. Maybe he's not on this album. Carthago, German band, really good band. I have their whole discography on CD and vinyl, but unfortunately the only thing on Repertoire was this, their second album, released on BASF in the US and Germany. Or actually, you know what? I think the debut is also on Repertoire, and hopefully it's here. So there's the second Livin' Blues album. Yeah, somehow when I stacked these for the video, I got them out of sequence. Lucifer's Friend, really good early 70s hard rock. This is their second album. The band featured, they were a German band, but they featured the British singer John Lawton, who would later join Uriah Heep. Really good album. This is their debut, released 1970. Their guitarist was Peter Heslin, and he played with James Last Orchestra. But this is super cool hard rock, kind of like merging Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. One of the heaviest albums of 1970, in my opinion. And we've got Heir Apparent. I believe this was a 1991 Repertoire CD issue. I'm not sure if the year would be on there. Yeah, 91. So that would predate any kind of SID or IFPI codes. That would have been a glass mastering at DADC Austria. And this was a psychedelic band produced by Jimi Hendrix. And Jimmy played on some of the songs here as well. And this has the familiar red tab on the spine. And 930 Fly, kind of a progressive rock psychedelic band, early 70s. This would be an early 90s CD. So next up is Birth Control, and I showed a few of those earlier. Unfortunately, I guess I got some of these bands split up. And this would be a 1997-ish, still sounding good. I also have, I think it's OHR or Spalix, one of those other labels that sounds okay, but this does sound a lot better. It's such a difference, the dynamic range anyways. And just the warmth and the separation. One of my favorite German bands. And unfortunately, the drummer, vocalist, he's a singing drummer, Bernd Noske, or Nosk, N-O-S-K-E. He passed away, a few years ago now. But I did see this band live much later in their career. I believe it was Harmony, at Harmony in Bonn, Germany. More Birth Control. This is probably their most progressive rock sounding album, this one. Probably 1997-ish, this CD. Original LP came out, I think, in 75 or 76, 75. Yeah, I'm gonna have fun putting all this stuff away. More Birth Control. This is their original, or their debut, I'm sorry. And I have the original LP, and it was actually a pillbox, like the Birth Control. And you could actually rotate. It's a gimmicks cover, I guess you would call it. Very good album. This one is fairly brick-walled, I have to say. This was the only Birth Control album that featured guitarist Dirk Steffens. And he released a really good solo album called The Seventh Step with Scottish vocalist... what's his name? Why can't I remember? See, I'm getting old. Rolf something, I don't know. I won't bother. I'm getting old. It might come to me in a minute. The US band Cactus, this featured Tim Bogert and Carmine Appice on drums. Tim Bogert on bass. Tim Bogert. My favorite Cactus album. And this was the only thing released on Repertoire, probably 1991-ish, I think. Really good sounding CD. I also have I think it's a Rhino or Atlantic CD issue, and they both sound okay, but I favor the sound of this one. Atomic Rooster. They released a lot of stuff on the Repertoire label. This is Nice and Greasy. This was the German cover art. I actually have that, and it was released on Brain. This is an early 90s CD reissue before they began using the green Brain. Very good album. Was also issued in the UK. This is Nice and Greasy. In the UK, it was called Nice and Greasy with an N apostrophe. And had a fried egg or something on a plate. I have that as well. The CD on Sequel. And the original Dawn LP. Here's the debut. Or no, sorry, this is the second album, Death Walks Behind You. In the US, it was released on Elektra with that atomic rocket with a rooster on it. This is the debut. Now, unfortunately, when I bought this, anybody familiar with this album featuring Carl Palmer, there was two mixes. There was the keyboard mix with no guitar, and it was originally released on B&C Records in the UK. Then it was remixed with John Ducan, who had just joined the band, and they remixed that for the American audience, thinking in the US they would prefer, guitar, with the popularity of Hendrix and everything else at that time. They didn't think the US market would gravitate towards a keyboard-driven album at this time. I'm not a fan of the guitar mix, I have to say. I like John Ducan with, Death Walks Behind You and all that, but on this one, it's so foreign and out of place when you're used to the keyboard mix. But unfortunately, when I bought this, I assumed it was going to be the keyboard mix. It is not. And what's funny about the original LP, even the US mix, they used the UK jackets like covers, so you didn't know what you were getting. You could differentiate by the label. The original B&C keyboard mix had a textured paper label with a large B&C logo, and of course the matrix runout would have differed. Otherwise, there was no way of knowing. And I remember in the early days of eBay, people didn't know what they were selling, they didn't know what they were buying, and a lot of unhappy people looking for the keyboard mix acquired the guitar remix. Atomic Rooster. This one is made in England. And this was like the US cover art, despite this being a German CD. In the UK and Germany, it was released in a burlap bag, entirely different cover art. Same music, as far as I know. That's Chris Farlow in the lineup at this point, and that's the drummer Rick Parnell with the hat. He would later play with Spinal Tap. And Rick immigrated to the US, and I think he was living in Montana up until his passing maybe three years ago. This is probably most people's favorite. That's mine too. Roger Dean cover art. Really good CD. Really good sonics on this. All this early Repertoire stuff is fantastic. Andromeda, speaking of John Ducan, this was his band before he hooked up with Atomic Rooster. Psychedelic progressive. Now here's Atlantis. That we mentioned them earlier with Frumpy. That's Inga Rumpf. And Jean-Jacques Cravet's on keyboard again with this band. Amon-Düül, 2, Carnival in Babylon. This was another brick-walled thing by... Not a fan of this one. This was early 2000s, and by that point... I bought it at that time not knowing, but after you buy one or two, you'd think you'd stop, but I still did. And possibly because I couldn't find anything else. But that being said, I think I would have had the French mantra version anyways. Who knows? When you see something, sometimes you buy it. And something, I was buying large collections too for a while, so I might have acquired this through a collection. I used to kind of sell stuff to supplement the income, both with records and CDs. Ancient Greece, they were a Welsh band, and this band featured, I think John Weathers was in this band, or he produced this, I think. And he would later join Gentle Giant as their drummer. I know this band has some connections to the other Welsh band that many are familiar with, Man. What else? Clear Blue Sky, another Roger Dean painting. And this was also on the Vertigo Swirl. Another yellow-tinged back tray. Cornucopia. More German goodness with excellent sonics here. Very cool psychedelic, almost like Vanilla Fudge meets some progressive weirdness. Very trippy. The Gods, Gods, they were a British band, and for whatever reason, their other album, oh, there it is, good. Interesting band. This featured Ken Hensley, pre-Uriah Heep, and I think Greg Lake played in this band for a while too, around 1967-68, but he was not featured on these albums. So it's Lee Kerslake was a drummer here, Ken Hensley, John Glasscock, I think, which he later turned up with Jethro Tull. These are both really good. Late 60s psychedelia. Gomorrah, another German band. I have the original LP. This is very good. They released 2, as far as I know. And I have the other album on CD, different label. Here's the other Carthago. And I have the original of this. It's got a really cool gimmicks, fold-out kind of poster cover. That's an excellent album, this. Now we're getting up to the second last pile. So this is Wishbone Ash. By far my favorite. This is anything but my favorite. Excuse me, I'm a little tired. Yeah, Locked In. I don't think I liked it back in the day, but as a completist, I bought the LP and this CD when I saw it on Repertoire. And I have all of their albums on CD and vinyl, but I think this was the only one released on Repertoire. Bakerloo. This is a really good band, and I think they only released this one album. And it featured Dave Clem Clempson, the guitarist, who would later replace Peter Frampton in Humble Pie. I think Terry Poole played drums on this too. Yeah, there's Poole. Good blues rock. I mentioned these guys earlier, Baker Gurvitz Army. Ginger Baker, Adrian and Paul Gurvitz. That's their debut. They released a few albums, but just the 2, I think, on Repertoire. Three-Man Army. And I believe this is the only one on Repertoire. I could be wrong. I have the other 2 albums on CD and vinyl. This was the German. In the UK, it was just released, I think, as Three-Man Army, self-titled, I forget. Alternate cover art. This was the German cover art. Really good album. Titanic were a Norwegian band that were based out of Germany, if I remember correctly. I only have the one on CD, but I have their first 3 or 4 on vinyl. Three-Man Army, here we go. They did have more than one on Repertoire. Tofat were sort of an offshoot of the Gods, who I just featured a minute ago, with Lee Kerslake on drums and Ken Hensley. But I think Lee Kerslake only played on this album. I forget. This one had Peter Green, uncredited guest guitarist, on one song. These are really good albums. Both of these. Tractor was kind of a duo. Well, they were a duo. And I believe the guitar player or drummer was a phys ed teacher, I remember reading. And they were also known as The Way We Live. They had released an album called A Candle for Judith, which I also have a CD. I should have put things together, but I didn't. Tonton Macoute. More progressive rock. Progressive jazz. British band. Really good music. Too bad they didn't make it. A lot of these bands were one-offs, or they just didn't make it, but not because they were lacking skill or talent. It's just a lot of to do with, bad management or, discrepancies between members, musical direction. Warhorse. This band featured Nick Simper, ex-Deep Purple bass player who appeared on the first 3 Deep Purple albums. And when they ousted him, he formed Warhorse. Vocalist was Ashley Holt, who I don't really care for. He played with Rick Wakeman. He sang with Rick Wakeman, and I didn't like his voice there. Here he's okay. He kind of overdoes it a bit, but it kind of suits the music. And again, it's progressive, keyboard driven. And in fact, Rick Wakeman played with this band for a spell before they recorded these albums. And both were released on the Vertigo Swirl. So Tucky Buzzard, this is a twofer. This band was produced and discovered by Bill Wyman, the bass player of the Stones at that time. The guitar player was Terry Taylor. Now, later, Bill Wyman had the Rhythm Kings, like in the 80s, 90s, up to maybe a few years ago. And Terry Taylor also played in that band with Bill. This is really good early 70s bluesy hard rock. And I believe they released 4 albums. There's 2 here. I have the other 2 on CD and on vinyl. Writing on the Wall, Scottish psychedelic progressive band, late 60s, early 70s. Their vocalist Linny Patterson would later join Scottish proggers, Beggars Opera, progressive rockers. This is a good album, good psychedelic. Pato, named after their vocalist Mike Pato. There's more Roger Dean cover art. I think that's my favorite by them. Ollie Halsall also was the guitar player here, and both those guys were in the band before that time box. Good jazzy prog. Pot Liquor. This is the only one that I have by them on Repertoire, or maybe I have another. I may have misspoke. Maybe I forgot to pull it out. But I have their first 3 on vinyl and their first 2 on CD. They're a US hard rock bluesy band. So next up is Ramassus. They were an early 70s progressive sort of psychedelic band. Essentially Ramassus, I forget his real name, that was a pseudonym. But his backing band were 10cc, as you can see there. Eric Stewart, Lowell Cream, Kevin Godley, Graham Goldman. Quatermass were a keyboard-driven progressive rock band. Let me think if I can remember here. Pete Robinson on keyboards, who would later play with, I think Brand X, and a couple other bands. John Gustafson on bass, who would turn up with Roxy Music later. And the drummer, Mick Underwood, yeah. I think Mick Underwood played with Roger Glover and Ian Gillan in episode 6, Pre-Deep Purple. This is, I believe, the 1994-95 CD issue. It's good. It sounds great. And I have the original UK LP on Harvest and the US and Canadian LP versions. This is the earlier CD. I happen to prefer the mastering on this one. This would have been 89 or 90, this one, Repertoire. Next up is Rumpelstiltskin. Let's see if I can remember. This is a band full of pseudonyms and aliases produced by Shel Talmy, who worked with Small Faces and, loads of other British bands. And he put this group of musicians together and they all went under pseudonyms. Herbie Flowers is in here, on bass, all under weird names like Jackson Primrose and all these silly names. See if I can get that to focus. And no, that's not Peter Green, the guitarist. This is the better of the 2 albums. This one's great. Here's the second album that I think was only released in Germany on Bellophone. I have the original LPs. The debut was released on Bell in both the UK, US, and Canada. Snafu. I won't tell you what that stands for. I think this is the only one on Repertoire. I have their first 2 or 3 original LPs. And there's the Mick Moody connection again. And to Whitesnake and Juicy Lucy. Bobby Harrison, who is also the vocalist with the band Freedom. repeat solely. Yeah, good bluesy rock. Beggar's Opera. That's the debut album. And I also have I forgot to pull out the second album, but I also have the second album, I think, on Leinam, another German CD reissue label. And I'll let people try and guess what's playing in the background. Hopefully I don't get flagged for this stuff on YouTube. This I don't care for the mastering on this one. I think it's early 2000s, this one. This is my favorite Beggar's Opera album. This is their third. And I have the original LP with the big poster fold out. And this does fold out too. And this has great sonics, this one. So it's funny, it's subjective. A lot of people, oh, Repertoire Brickwall, they sound like crap. Even one guy on Discogs reviewed the label, but I think he's thinking of some of the later stuff. Because these earlier Repertoire CDs sound fantastic. Ben, they were a British jazz progressive band, also released on the Vertigo Swirl. Here we go with The Way We Live. I mentioned earlier Tractor, the duo. Same guys here. Candle for Judith. String Driven Thing. They were a violin kind of driven progressive psychedelic band. Really good stuff, and I think this might be the only thing that released on Repertoire. Here, a stretch. Kirby Gregory on guitar. In fact, this band toured as the bogus Fleetwood Mac stateside. I think it was, what's his name, Davies. Clive Davis, I think. Could be misspoken, but he tried to put the tour together with Fleetwood Mac for whatever the reason. The actual members didn't want to do that. They didn't fulfill the tour. Could be legalities involved there, I'm not sure, I forget. But he put this lineup together and fooled the American audience, believing they were seeing the Fleetwood Mac Bob Welch lineup, but it was not, it was Stretch. Good band. Streetwalkers, which is essentially Roger Chapman from Family and Charlie Whitney from Family. Oh, this is a fantastic. If you're into Mellotron, this is Mellotron heaven, and I have 3 different versions on CD. This is my favorite sounding of the 3. The other is SPM, I think, which was a vinyl rip, and not a very good one. This is great. And I forget the third version, but really good album. So next up is Sparks. They were also known as Half Nelson during the early 70s, but many are familiar with Sparks' later material from the mid-70s onward into the earlier 80s. But this is really cool, bluesy, hard rock, much different than what they became known for later. They also had the album A Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing, I think it was called, and I have that as well. I failed to pull it out. Stone the Crows, they were a Scottish blues rock band that featured Maggie Bell on vocals, Les Harvey, who was Alex Harvey's brother, Les Harvey on guitar, his younger brother. I think he died on stage. He was electrocuted touching a live mic stand, mic stand, and he was killed on stage. I think he was replaced by Jimmy McCulloch, who was coming out of, I guess, Thunderclap Newman before he joined the Wings, and he also played with this band. Colin Allen was their drummer, and Colin would play with the Dutch band Focus eventually. This is their debut. This is a really good album. Ode to John Law is my favorite. That's their second. Teenage Licks is their third. Really good album. Still Life, kind of a one-off British progressive band. And here we have Affinity. Early 70s hard rock, progressive psychedelic, keyboard, guitar-driven rock. I have a US pressing of this, and it was also originally released in the UK on the Vertigo Swirl. Osmundi, I guess we categorize them as krautrock, early 70s German progressive psychedelic. I believe this is their second album. I actually own the original LP as well. I don't have the debut on Repertoire. I don't think it was released on the label. I do have it on a different label. Oh, that's upside down. And again, this would be a 1996, 97-ish, still sounding good. I wish I could pinpoint the exact year when things went topsy-turvy for Repertoire, when they got overly loud. Perhaps 1999. Spirit of John Morgan, British hard rock progressive, incorporating quite a bit of blues. Really good album. So now we're down to, last but not least, Steamhammer. They were a late 60s, early 70s British blues rock band. Eventually they kind of veered into progressive hard rock. This is their debut, and this band featured, I guess most notably, Martin Pugh on guitar. I think that's how you pronounce it, P-U-G-H. And Louis Sinamo on bass, who was kind of known for bowing his bass. Both those fellows turned up a few years later in the mid-70s hard rock band Armageddon, that also featured Keith Relf, ex-Yardbirds, and Bobby Caldwell on drums, who was also with Captain Beyond on their first album. So, and this is their second album. That's a really good one. Mountains, excellent. And I have the original B and C LP. I have all of these on vinyl. That's a good one. I wonder how long this video, it must be pushing 3/4 of an hour. And that's their final LP. And a lot of the music on this one, in particular Martin's guitar runs and some of the riffing, would resurface again 3 years later, I guess, with Armageddon in 75. So that's that for my Repertoire CDs. And again, I hope this doesn't get flagged because of the background music. But have a good one.